Welcome to Focus on Health, a series of educational programs highlighting current health issues sponsored by the Department of Nursing at Salisbury University. I'm Mary DiBartolo, Professor of Nursing at Salisbury University and host of the program. I welcome Rhonda Lewis. You are from the Wicomico County Department of Social Services, and you are the Adult Services Supervisor.
Yes, thank you for having me today.
And I'm so glad you could come on. Now, we're here to talk about a very important topic, that of elder abuse. And this is actually part two of a segment I started previously, where we had a representative from MAC Incorporated, the Area Agency on Aging, who's the ombudsman there, Cheryl St. Bell, who talked about elder abuse when it occurs in facilities like nursing homes and such. And you are here to talk about the problem when it occurs in community-based older adults that are living at home and so on. But I think the first thing we want to do is have you explain what your department does and what your job entails.
Okay. Well, as you said, I work for the Wicomico County Department of Social Services, and I am the Adult Services Supervisor. So within the Adult Services unit, I have 4 workers, and they are responsible for conducting all of the adult protective services and investigations throughout Wicomico County. We have guardians of the state that we are responsible for, which is if anybody is 18 to 65 and they do not have a relative, family, friend able to make decisions for them, and the court has deemed them incompetent, then the department is charged with being their overseer. We have social services to adults, which is a home-based program. We try to keep people in their home aging in place. And home aid services. So we do work with different vendors throughout the state of Maryland to put chore and personal care in someone's home. We have Project Homes, which is an adult foster care home. And we actually have 9 here in the county, which is the most on this side of the bridge, on the shore here. And that program houses about 38 residents here from Wicomico who are 18 or older that are unable to live independently in the community by themselves. And then we also do a respite care program. So for anybody who has a loved one that they need a break, they want to go on vacation, we're able to help fund that so they can get someone in there to care for their loved one while they're getting a little bit of relax and renewal.
Well, I don't think most people realize that your department does all those things. But I know for this show, we're going to focus on your role in terms of adult protective services and handling cases of reported elder abuse that occur more so in the home. So let's talk about elder abuse and a definition and the various types of elder abuse that we might see.
Okay. A definition of elder abuse is anyone 18 or older who has been either abused, neglected, or exploited, whether financially or sexually, by anybody in the caregiving role.
And that can be physical abuse too,
yes,
or
physical.
neglect, failing to provide.
Right, failing to provide care or the malicious intent to harm.
Now, what kind of statistics do you have on how prevalent this is?
In FY17, which would have been from July 1 to June 30th of 17, the Department of Social Services in Wicomico, we had over 630 calls for concerns about elders in the community.
And when you get a call, it has to be investigated if it meets certain criteria?
Right, as long as it meets the criteria that the person is a vulnerable adult and the allegations occur in Wicomico County, then we have 5 days to go out and to investigate abuse or neglect. Unless it's deemed urgent or emergent, then we have to respond within 24 hours. And emergent and urgent would be physical abuse, sexual abuse, or severe neglect.
Now, you mentioned vulnerable adults. Now, what would be the risk factors for those? Who is considered vulnerable per se?
Anybody 18 or older who are unable to meet their daily activities of living on their own. So it affects a lot of people who are disabled, have mental challenges, physical challenges, with the older population, it has a lot to do with, the dementia, the just not being able to care for themselves.
So definitely having Alzheimer's and dementia, you see a lot of cases related to
Yes.
that. And I imagine that's not only just physical abuse or sexual abuse, but financial.
Yes.
Especially if they're early on, still living at home, but not quite on top of their financial situation.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about the different types. There is such a thing as emotional abuse, but you said your office does not address that type of abuse.
The state doesn't allow us to investigate emotional abuse. However, if someone is called in an allegation that there's concerns about the way someone's talking to someone, in addition to neglect or physical abuse, we address that when we're out there, but we can't actually do a whole investigation on emotional abuse. But we do try to educate the caregivers on you cannot belittle, you cannot,
Right.
talk rude to their loved ones.
Well, I guess what makes it challenging is it's a he said, she said thing.
Right.
And oftentimes it's actual family members that commit many of these abuses at times, in addition to hired,
Right.
paid caregivers that are asked to come out to the home and paid. And I guess the agency would be responsible for
Yes.
handling those complaints. Well, then let's get back to the ones you do handle, and that would be the physical, sexual neglect / abandonment. I imagine that happens occasionally. You hear stories of people just being dropped off somewhere.
Yes.
And then we'll talk about financial as a separate issue. So
Okay.
let's address more of the physical, sexual neglect, first.
Okay. So physical abuse would be any type of hitting, rough handling, burning. We see it a lot with, unexplained bruises. We've had the allegations where they've moved the walkers. So then when the elder goes to get up, they have nothing to hold on to, so then they're falling. So with the physical, it can be difficult because as older adults, their skin's frail, the medications they're on, they do cause bruising. So with us, when we go out to investigate, we have to look at what is reported and then kind of look at the injuries to see if they match up.
I know it must be tough because some people do bruise easily, and that can be, oh well, that wasn't me, that was a bruise, or she bumps into this or that.
Right.
That can be tough. Now I guess sexual, that's a tough one to talk about. You try not to think that happens,
Right.
but there are a few cases, I imagine.
Yes, there are a few. We've had a few cases over the past year, and it is, we typically get those reports when there's unexplained bruising in the genital area or on the breast, unexplained bleeding, or unfortunately some STDs that would be unexplained. And then trying to figure out exactly who that perpetrator is normally the hardest, because if the person is demented or has a very low IQ because of their developmental disability, trying to really pinpoint who the perpetrator is can be difficult.
Sure, and I know you mentioned STDs or sexually transmitted infections and things. And what about neglect? Is that hard to investigate because it's withholding, and it can be withholding care of the person, I guess food, water?
Yeah, with neglect, a lot of times what we see is the family members do not take them to their medical appointments. They don't take them to podiatry, so we have like a lot of long overgrown toenails. They're not giving them the proper medications. They're not feeding them maybe one meal a day. And really, when I say one meal a day, sometimes it's like a sandwich and some chips, and it's kind of set on the table next to them. So it's really up to the elder to like grab it. They're just, not bathing them, not helping them change their Depends, allowing them to sit in their own waste for hours on end. So we are able to go in and look at that. Sometimes the difficult is getting someone to admit that they're actually their caregiver. Because, family will say, well, I just stopped by and help.
But this one is responsible.
Right,
Or
it's that he,
finger-pointing.
shoe,
Yeah.
yes. back and forth.
Is it safe to say that in some cases that if they're not getting their medicines or taking them to appointments, that sometimes it's a way to save their money if they're committing some sort of financial abuse at the same time?
Yes, typically they neglect and even physical abuse. There's normally the underlying component of financial in some way.
So let's move on to financial abuse. Tell us a little more about that, because you said of all your statistical reports and so on, that is one of the most common one that you're getting
and
calls
it is growing.
about. Yeah.
Well, financial abuse has anything to do with the misuse of someone's funds or property. We have seen a growing increase in that since in 2012, it became that all banks and fiduciary institutions are now mandated by law to report any suspicious activity. So throughout the state, that's been the growing trend, unfortunately. But we do see a lot of financial abuse. It comes in as the banks are concerned or families are concerned that all of a sudden the person's making numerous trips to the bank throughout the month, where typically maybe originally they were only going when their Social Security check was coming in. Now they're going weekly. Different people are taking them. Unexplained, unusual people that they say are now their friends. Large withdrawals. Family members will use the older person's money for their own use instead of, paying for basic needs that the vulnerable adult could need.
Do you think, I would imagine some of this has to do to stealing and using money for their own purposes would be if there's drug abuse going on with that person?
Yeah.
Stealing their medications,
Yes.
pain medications is also a subset of this?
Yeah, we've seen a growing rate of the financial exploitation and medications being stolen since the whole opiate epidemic has hit.
So unfortunate.
It is. And we always try to educate when we go out to meet with a vulnerable adult and family members that are truly caring and involved, that there's different ways around that. It's not just going to the banks and stealing, taking money, but, family members will go to their grandparents and have elaborate stories. Like their kids are sick and they need money. They have medical appointments but don't have insurance to pay the bills. So it's almost that undue influence where they will almost bully the person to signing checks over, giving them money.
So I guess in some cases it's family members reporting other family members that they feel are taking advantage. Then we have complete strangers that take advantage of frail older adults, and particularly those with Alzheimer's or dementia, with phone calls, soliciting money.
Yes.
I'm sure you have a few examples of that.
Yeah, we've had several older individuals. They get phone calls in the middle of the night, that their grandson or granddaughter's out of the state, out of the country, and they've been arrested for this, so you have to wire money here or there. Or they'll get the scams where if you pay us this amount of money, we'll give you, thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And they get that. We also have had recently, it's very sad that people read the obituaries. The obituaries tell a lot. Tells how long you've been married to someone, how that loved one is gone. Typically tells about that loved one's hobbies, what they were interested in, and people play off of that.
Oh my.
And then they will call, they befriend that loved one that's still alive because that's a connection. That person's lonely. And then they eventually will, ask for money to borrow and, yeah.
Well, I guess what concerns me is I know we have a lot of groups like yourselves, say AARP, they're always publishing articles about what to look for. And if you're a cognitively intact older person, you can hopefully follow that advice and be careful. And you can still be vulnerable. And then you have people with dementia or Alzheimer's that simply do not have the wherewithal. and are easily preyed upon. So that's something that's going to be hard to change, I think, because
Right.
it will still happen, I think, no matter
Yes.
how hard families try to protect. I guess the key is picking it up quickly and taking action, making that phone call and such. So let's go back for a minute. Let's just talk about some of the symptoms. You mentioned briefly, these are more for physical. You're saying you can see obviously signs, bruising, burns, scars, but also it can be more subtle things, right? Like they're having trouble sleeping, they're more withdrawn and not doing the usual social activities. Are these the kind of signs families should look for
Yes.
if they think some caregiver's coming in and either physically abusing or even emotional or neglect?
And even sometimes if you notice that if you have paid caregivers coming in, or even family members that are helping you care for your loved one, and during bathing or changing, all of a sudden they're tensing up, they're becoming more almost aggressive where they don't want to be changed, that's a sign to look at, because that kind of triggers you that something's happening during that event that is called, doing that recall. Weight loss is a big one. And actually weight gain, because sometimes with different medications, especially if they're supposed to get like their Lasix and stuff and now they're not, and they're getting
It's a fluid pill, yeah.
then they're swelling because of the fluids and things to look at. Chapped lips, which you wouldn't think, oh, it's just chapped lips. But if they're not being hydrated enough, their lips will start to chap.
Wow, so complicated, because some of these things can happen, with aging, with disease and so on. So it's a fine line, but I guess it's better safe to report.
And I think that family members, it's very stressful to care for your loved one at home, and it's very taxing. And it's not an easy job for anybody. And they really also have to look at who they're hiring to come in. You can't just agree and bring people in. Do research, do background checks on case search.
Well, most of these agencies are supposed to do background checks anyway, but using a reputable agency, with good recommendations and so on. The other thing that complicates this, I'm sure you can talk about this, is many older adults know it's happening, but they're too ashamed to report any kind of mistreatment or embarrassed to say they got swindled out of their money.
A lot of older adults, and believe it or not, a lot of family members don't really want to talk about it, because it is embarrassing that this happened to their family. But a lot of adults, older adults, even though they can recognize it and they can talk to investigators and law enforcement that yes, this happened, they really don't want to press charges on their loved one.
Especially if it's a power position of a family member that's sitting there looking at them like,
Right.
no, I didn't do that.
Right.
Why would you say that? It's just a very uncomfortable situation. But
And when we investigate, we always try to talk to, the victim by themselves, and then the perpetrators by themselves. But we always try, before we talk to those perpetrators, is to find family that is supportive of the victim to come in and have that conversation with them and let the victim know that it's not your fault. It's okay. It happens to many of people.
So let's get into a more systematic discussion of what to do if you suspect abuse. We talked about the signs and the vulnerabilities and so on. So what should someone do if they suspect abuse? And I guess let's talk about the physical, sexual neglect separately, and then we'll discuss the financial, even though they call the same place, right?
Yes, they do call the same place. And I would like to say that actually starting October 1st of 2017, it's been a long time coming, but Adult Protective Services, we've always had only 30 days to complete an investigation. So when we get that phone call, that's day one. So it doesn't take into account holidays, weekends. We have 30 days to gather all of our information and make a ruling. And sometimes that's very difficult to get medical records from doctors' offices. They're very busy to get bank statements and things. So for the past several years, legislation has been put in. But this year it was actually passed that October 1 of 17, we actually have 60 days now.
that's good.
So it gives us that more time to really do an thorough investigation. But if anybody suspects, whether you're a mandated reporter, whether you're just a citizen, a neighbor, family, friend, whoever, you can call the Department of Social Services and make that report.
We'll post that number at the end. And of course, you said it has a menu where you can, you know, just press the button or the number for specific abuse reporting.
And then they will get, there's live individuals that sit on that line Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. They will get all the information from you they can. And then if it meets the criteria, the case is assigned to a caseworker.
And then they will have 60 days
Yes,
coming up shortly. Okay, very good. That's very good. And then what usually happens with that investigation? There'll be a ruling within that 60-day period now, either saying that no abuse occurred or they'll move forward with charges against that person?
What happens is with physical abuse, neglect by others, financial, sexual abuse, pretty much any of the abuses other than self-neglect, because you can't really charge the person with themselves. But if we go out or the allegations are strong enough at the beginning of the investigation, when we get the referral, we go ahead and contact law enforcement. We have a memorandum of understanding with all the local law enforcement in Wicomico that we will work jointly together.
Well, that's very
for
good.
the investigations.
I mean, abuse shouldn't happen, but if it does, there's certainly, you know, channels and actions people can take to address it.
Yeah, and we never disclose who the reporter is. The reporter is always anonymous. They have the right to say they want to remain anonymous and not give any of their contact information, or they can give their contact information knowing it is anonymous, that the only people who will see that is the workers. And then we would only contact them to help make a plan for the adult, or if we need a little bit more information, but it's never disclosed to the perpetrator, the victim, or anyone.
You mentioned neighbors. How often does that occur? Do neighbors keep an eye out, do you find, and they'll report things?
They do. They will, especially like in the senior communities, the senior housing complexes and things. If they start seeing, you know, younger people visiting the elderly, always taking them out, they will sometimes call and say, I don't know if something's really going on, but we're just concerned.
Well, that could be really hard to prove, can it? If they're going out with younger people under the guise that, oh, let me treat you to lunch, let me do this, let me buy you that, and then, you know, who's to say the person isn't willingly doing it or being coerced or has dementia? I guess it's complicated.
It is, and like a lot of those cases, they don't really meet the criteria for an exploitation or, you know, an APS investigation, but we sometimes will still send our workers out as an information and referral just to check on that elder to make sure they're okay, to see if they have any concerns, if they need any services in the community, just so they know we're here if they need us.
Now, what if a situation occurs where you go out to the home and the person doesn't know they have Alzheimer's, the family hasn't had them evaluated, or you know, just hasn't taken them for a diagnosis per se? Can you ever get involved and suggest to the family, if it's a family member reporting it, to say, you know, they need to be evaluated and establish that dementia's going on so that you can provide a more protected environment for them?
We do, because when we go out, we look at their medical, their social, their family interactions. We look at the whole picture, not just the individual right there. So we try to get in contact with the doctors and get medical records. If they haven't been to the doctors recently, we encourage the family to do that if the family's willing and you know, supportive and helpful. If family's not, and they really need to go to a physician because they haven't, we will help transport them. We will make sure they get the medical needs they need to make sure they're safe, whether they have family involvement or not.
Because that is such a key thing in those cases, I think. So.
It is.
Well, thank you so much for being on the program. Is there one finishing, you know, statement you want to make to sum up this topic?
I mean, I would just say that it is happening. It is, you know, a growing trend. It's probably not going to go away, even though we all would like for it to. So as community persons, community members, just please be diligent. And if you suspect anything, just call.
Better to call than
It's
not
better to call than not to call, because if there's something and you have that gut feeling something's not right, probably something's not right.
Again, I agree with you on that. It's always better to be safe than sorry. And we will post some websites at the end of the program, as well as information on the phone number to call if someone does suspect abuse. And again, thank you so much for coming in to talk about this.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining us for this edition of Focus on Health here on PAC 14.